Well, welcome everybody. Good morning. It's so good to see you. I'm so happy to be here. I wanted to start off with a slide that I really enjoy. This picture. It's a picture that's not written or not drawn by a person who's a Christian, but I think they were trying to capture the creation of the earth, and it's so interesting that you see in the middle, you see those three shadowy personages that are all linked together. And we know at the beginning we had God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit participating. And it says, now the earth was formless and void. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So that one kind of spoke to me. That well, continuing on, this is the third of a series of 4 talks in September that we're covering the harm evolution has done in our society and to the world. And I have the saying that men don't reject the Bible because it conflicts with itself. It's because it contradicts them. So as Pastor Craig said, we're all about the mission of exalting Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. We want to teach the Bible and all of its aspects. We want to equip you, the saints, to go out and tell the world. And so that's what I'm here to do. And I wanted to start with a slide I kind of enjoy. This is called our backward society. It's like looking in your rear view mirrors at the automobile. We have doctors that are destroying babies through abortion, even late-term abortion. We have media destroying information, the fake news. We have government destroying freedom with all the laws and laws and laws and laws that they're making. It's really, it really spoke to me. The thing when I was handing out constitutions to my students on the 18th, it's Constitution Day, and it was striking how thin that little book is. The Constitution and the amendments, the 27 amendments for the Constitution. It's a thin little book. And then I thought, well, gee, God told us everything we need to do in 10 commandments. So I shouldn't be surprised. And if it was written today, Obamacare was something like 300 books, we'll pass it and we'll read it later, right? So government destroys freedoms. Universities destroy knowledge. They won't allow speakers that speak against the PC kind of society we live in. And the courts destroy justice. We have the Ninth Court of Appeal in California that does wonderful things to our laws. Anyway, that was kind of interesting. And I just wanted to say, this is a repeat of what I said a couple of weeks ago. Ideas do have consequences. And this is tied to science and logic by the fact that there is cause and effect. In human understanding, in logic, we use the law of cause and effect. If something happens, there has to be a cause. Something doesn't come from nothing, as opposed to what the astrophysicists tell us today, that the universe was created from an infinitesimally small spot that was nothing. So what I wanted to say was, if you look at Darwinism and evolution, as I said before, Darwin isn't the devil, he's not the Antichrist, but what his thinking was, the times of the Enlightenment and then after the Enlightenment, that his ideas of how evolution happened in the biological sense now has been applied to the evolution of the universe, evolution of society, evolution of everything. So that word is tied with wild abandonment to all kinds of descriptions of how things change. But Darwinism has affected religion and has affected human society in profound ways. And I hope to be able to show you that it's tied to atheism virtually one-to-one. So some Christians think, evolution, it's just a theory like the theory of relativity or the theory of planetary motion. Wrong. Relativity and gravity are theories that have been validated over and over and accepted laws. Evolution is not. If you study evolution, the fossil record, the fact that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, there's tremendous evidence in that fossil record, in the study of dinosaur remains, that the animals and things happened only a few thousand years ago, not billions or millions of years ago. So evolution, taken to its logical conclusion, rejects God. And the people who were Darwin's spokesmen, who took it into government and took it into different forms of politics, it just shows that you have a substitute for God. They've substituted science for God, and science to them is evolution. So here's a simple little chart. You have atheism on the left and theism on the right. And if you put Darwinism or evolution in there, it's 100% of the atheists believe in evolution. And unfortunately, some of the theists believe in evolution. It's called theistic evolution, where God made the first single-cell creature, and then over time and vast time periods that evolved into a worm, and then a fish, and then an amphibian, and land animal, etc. Theism encompasses creation. So most of the theists believe in creationism. Some believe the theistic evolution, but all of the atheists believe in evolution, not creation. And I showed this, I think, 2 sessions ago. This is my view of how atheism and racism certainly has existed since ancient times, but in the 1850s, when evolution was proposed and then it was accepted and pushed forward, we've got, as offsprings of that, corrupt science, eugenics, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, what I call scientific racism, or some people call it biological racism. We have Nazism coming out of that, where you can, survival of the fittest means there must be a better race of dogs that are superior. There's a better race of pigeons that are superior, so there must be a better race of people that are superior. So Nazism, and then as that died out due to the Holocaust and the aftermath of Second World War, then we now have white supremacy and also communism. So I showed that last week. But the end effect, what they're all trying, all those arrows are going into a bar that I've called Destroy Christianity. That's their goal. They're not trying to destroy anything else. So evolution subverts the gospel. Atheists know that, and some Christians don't. So I have this quote from Richard Borsath, and has the article named "The Meaning of Evolution" and published in the American Atheist magazine. I'm sure that's a subscription you get every week. And he said, Christianity has fought, still fights, and will fight desperately to the end over evolution, because evolution destroys utterly and finally the very reason Jesus' earthly life was supposedly made necessary. Destroy Adam and Eve, original sin, and in the rubble you will find the sorry remains of the Son of God. If Jesus was not the Redeemer who died for our sins, this is what evolution means. Then Christianity is nothing. What all this means is that Christianity cannot lose the Genesis account of creation and get along. The battle must be waged for Christianity is fighting for its very life. So as the people that are saying that Genesis is just a bunch of interesting fairy tales or moral tales to help people understand good and evil, that's one view. And then the other view is Genesis is history. So we have to understand Genesis is history. All of the archaeological finds of the things that are reported in Genesis are 100% true. They found Jericho, they found Babel, they found all of these cities and places and kings and that were mentioned in the Genesis account. So it's not just fairy tales, it's a description of history. And this one really kind of breaks my heart. This is an article written by a teacher published in Scientific American. And what should teachers say to students who doubt evolution. So this teacher says, I feel a bit queasy, I admit, challenging their faith. Some of them derive great comfort from their religion. Part of me agrees with one student, says each individual is entitled to his or own religious belief. Then he said, on the other hand, if I don't prod these young people and question their most cherished beliefs, I'm not doing my job, am I? So the teachers have this zeal that they're tricked into believing that science points in one direction when it actually points in the other. And he says when he's grading papers, he separates them into evolution and faith can be compatible as long as faith is willing to abandon the literal interpretation of Genesis. Science trumps faith, and faith trumps science. Those all get F. So this is why your children, when you send them to school, it used to be in university where a lot of young people who were raised Christian lost their faith. Then it went to high school, and now it's in middle school. And that's why I teach middle school, is because that's where the first attack is happening. Now it may be going to elementary school with the new laws they're passing. So this is the result. We have on the left side, 95% of the people, the young people who attend church regularly during their elementary and middle school years, lose 40% of them. By the time they're in high school, they have fallen from 95 to 55, so it's a 40% decrease. And then by the time they go through college, they lose another 35. So in total, about 75 to 80% of the young people who are in this church environment, in other church environments that don't teach what needs to be taught, they get removed from the Lord. Their souls are lost. And this just gives you a different accounting of when they had their first doubts. Almost 40% had doubt in middle school. Additional 43% had their first doubts in high school, and 10% had their first doubts in college. So most of it happens in middle school and high school. You don't have to send them off to college to have their kids lose their faith. So this is the first movie. Craig, if you could play video number 1, it's called Fallout. And this is some interviews of young people.
66 to 88% of young people are leaving the church never to return. And you will see a direct correlation with those who've remained in the faith and those who've left the church.
Creation or evolution, which do you believe?
I'd probably have to say evolution.
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 Is there any powerful argument that makes you think evolution is true that causes that confusion?
I think the studies that have been done on apes and monkeys are pretty compelling.
I think that the genetic sequence can change over time, over millions and billions of years.
Mostly fossil records and just databases of really just the fossil records.
In your church background, were you ever exposed to any scientific evidence for creation by your church leaders, pastors, anything like that?
Definitely not.
Nothing in particular, no.
No, I don't believe so.
Do you still attend church today or not anymore?
Only for holidays.
We kind of stopped going together as a family, but...
You see, there's one worldview that every single person in this country has been exposed to. The idea that evolution is true and that the Bible's account of origins is nothing more than fairy stories. When we demonstrate to believers that the evidence strongly supports the historical account of the Bible, not only is their faith ignited, but they become excited about sharing the Bible's truth with family, friends, neighbors, and even co-workers.
Did your church leaders, student leaders, bring in any creation teaching that showed you there was scientific evidence to support the Bible's account of creation?
Yes.
Yeah, we learned a lot about different creationist scientists and the proof of young earth creationism.
What are you studying now?
Biology.
Biology, right. Steeped in evolution. So, but you're not convinced by the evolutionary arguments in your biology classes?
No.
Still attend church today?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, every Sunday.
Would it be fair to say then that being able to discuss creation openly at church has helped strengthen you in that area, prepare you for what you've learned here at college about evolution?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that was from a group called creation.com. They've given over 3,000 lectures all around the world. They're Australian based, but they are in the US. They have a group that focuses on the US. And whenever they go give a lecture, they always try to go to a local school or college. So those are some interviews that they've taken, and they said that the result is basically 90% that kids that have been exposed and understand what the teaching of creation, and it's actually based on science, true science, instead of the evolutionary science, and they stay strong in their faith. So evolution has harmed people. Belief in evolution has undermined the belief that the Bible is inerrant. So they're attacking Genesis, as the atheist was saying. Belief in evolution has given non-believers an easy way out. So if sometimes you say, oh, well, do you believe in Jesus Christ? No, I believe in evolution. And then there's no explanation. They don't have to explain why they believe in evolution. They just use that as kind of escape. And then belief in evolution has led to compromise within the Christian faith. A lot of the churches, like the kids said, they went to church and they never heard anything about creation. So the pastors and the other leaders have walked away. And finally, evolution leads many young people away from the church. And I think that was video evidence. And there's books been written. Ken Ham has written books of Already Lost called Lies. So there's many books that have been written based on deep polling of young people. Okay, so then the effect of Darwin revolution on the 18th and 19th century thinking is striking and pervasive in the general harm it's done to humanity. It's not just contrary to effectively steering the culture, but it's moving the whole culture away from God and adopting atheism. So you see, in 1953, we had the prayer removed from public schools. We've had a continuous erosion, and it's speeding up right now. We're getting more and more erosion of the values that we teach in the Bible and that we teach in this church, in our society, and especially it's being implemented through the public schools. You can see them inserting all of their ideas into the public schools. Transgenderism, shared bathrooms. You don't go to Nordstrom's and see men and women going into the same bathroom, but when you go to elementary school and middle school and high school, they have bathrooms that are shared. If you feel like you're a different gender that day, or any gender, you can use whatever bathroom you identify as. And the goal is to destroy Christianity. And it's been planned, that's the mission of these militant atheists. And they use evolution as a tool, as a, quote, scientific tool, but it isn't, to try to drive that wedge into our society and into our nation. And these are just some pictures I took off the internet of Darwin, his famous voyage to the Galapagos Islands and the HMS Beagle, his book, The Origin of the Species, his Tree of Life, where the first animal or living creature was an unknown creature at the bottom, and then we've got everything evolving from that. The fossil record was mentioned by some of the students in the video, and then the supposed evolution of human beings, going from an ape-like creature to an ape-like creature. In the Hebrew language in the Bible, repeated words are used for emphasis. And my example is the phrase, glory, glory, glory is God, holy, holy, holy is God Almighty. And that's in Genesis 1, the word, there's Genesis 1:11, 1:12, 1:21, 124, and 125, those red circles, which you can't see very well, that circles the word kind. In Genesis, the kind of animals he said God made the animals after their kind. There are words in Hebrew, and I've checked this with Marty, that can show the feeling of changing from one thing to another. And the Bible says that God made animals after their kind. So what does kind mean? We look in scientific textbooks, we don't see the word kind. And so when you look at the taxonomy of the classification of animals, you can see kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and the species. So where is kind? So kind is actually family. So when you have animals of the same kind, that means they can reproduce. So if you have two dogs, you might have a dog of the St. Bernard kind, and you might have a dog of a poodle kind, and they can mate and have an offspring. You might have, say, an equestrian animal. You might have a horse, and you might have a donkey or a zebra. Those are all animals that are compatible. They call the mating between a zebra and a donkey a zedonk. And they actually have zedonks at the Creation Museum in Kentucky, the Answers in Genesis Creation Museum. And they also have a zorse, so that's a zebra and a horse. So they have zorses and zonkies. Oh my. So family is at the level where reproduction can happen. So what is the definition of biological evolution? I wanted to make that clear. So when you're talking to somebody and say, oh, that evolved, you have to have them understand that the real definition of the theory is that all living forms in the world have arisen from a single source. So there's only one beginning of life, and then from all of that came all of the other life, which itself came from inorganic material. There wasn't something living, and then there was something living. And this violates Louis Pasteur's finding that life only comes from life. And they teach this actually in high school textbooks in the public schools. But they don't connect it with evolution. If life only comes from life, where did the first life come from? Must have come from non-life, right? If it's the first life, then there was not life, and then there was life. So since this all arose from a single cell, all living organisms today have evolved at the same amount of time. So humans, fish, dogs, bacteria, ants, all have evolved for the same time. You have a starting point somewhere in the distant past, and then you have today, and that time is the same for each one of those animals. So this leads evolutionists to believe that all life has the same intrinsic value. Since that ant has evolved for the same number of millions of years as a human, then you shouldn't step on or kill on, spray the ant to get it out of your kitchen. So, and this applies to many things. And so here I've got this picture. I had to do it in two sections. So this is the bottom of the so-called tree of life. The little anti-signs are drawn around organisms that are extinct, so those didn't make it. So the origin of life, and you see on the left the crustaceans, the snails, and the sea creatures, and on the right you see the plants, and in the middle is sort of the mammals. And as you go to the top, you can see, there's more creatures that are extinct, dinosaurs, and some of these fish that they say. But the koalas and the hippos and the apes and the bears and man all today. So everything has evolved the same amount of time, so everything has the same intrinsic value. The biblical view of humanity is that God created mankind in his own image. And he loves, and he's commanded us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And he says, most important being is you knit me together in my mother's womb. So God is recognized to have created man in his own image. And we're told to love our neighbor. It's not say we don't love animals or we, care for animals. You don't love them in the same way as human beings. But the human is elevated over all other forms of life. We're not supposed to disrespect that life, but you're not supposed to honor it in the same way that we honor one another. And they've done this poll over and over and over. If you say, you know, if you have a dog and a stranger that are in peril and you can only save one, you know, a bus is coming or a flood is coming and you can only save either your dog or a stranger, you know, if you say, well, you want to save your grandmother or the dog, you know, most people choose grandmother. But if you at the bottom, if you see, it's an astounding 40% of respondents said if they had the choice of saving their dog or saving tourists that they saw on the street, they'd save their dog. So 40% of the people have been infected with this idea of the low value of human life, and that becomes apparent. That's one of the causes that becomes apparent in some of the terrible things we see. And here's two sad examples, you know, tragic examples. On the left are the two young men that went into Columbine High School with massive amount of weaponry and shot students and teachers indiscriminately. And they said that they were the natural selectors. They had things posted on their social media, and they had T-shirts that said natural selector. And so those two young men, confused and, you know, possessed maybe, killed so many people. And then the fellow on the right, he's from Finland. He's a Finnish. It's worldwide. He believed that he admired Hitler, and he believed humanity is overrated. He's wearing a T-shirt that says that. And so this is the consequence. You know, you think of what we teach our children over and over. We come from some slime that came from a rock. We're just the same value as, you know, that cat or that fish is just as important as you are. I eat the fish for lunch, so I'm going to kill you, take you out. I don't like you. And the sad thing is you can go on Wikipedia or any 100 different sites, and we've become numb. We've become numb from these school shootings over and over and over. Here's how many deaths? 33 deaths. This is in Virginia Tech, 23-year-old student. Newtown, Connecticut. You know, that's the Sandy Hook. You probably remember the Sandy Hook shooting. 28 people killed, 2 injuries. This is Parkland, Florida. You remember that one? The Stone Douglas High School shooting. 17 people killed, 17 injured. Littleton, Colorado, that's Columbine High School. 15 people killed, 21 people injured. You go and you send your kid to high school and they never come back. There's more. Santa Fe, Texas, Roseburg, Oregon, Red Lake, Minnesota. I found this map. This is a map that shows the school shootings since the year 2000. You don't hear about it. We've become immune. There's so many school shootings. 1 or 2 people got killed. That doesn't make the national news. It doesn't. Why not? Just look at that map and see. This is how terrible, you know, it's just all over the United States because we're teaching a common misunderstanding to all of the children throughout the whole United States. And the world. The world is being infected by that too. So this is my second outcome. Evolution has harmed the sanctity of life. Evolution has undermined the belief that there is good ordained moral truths, 10 commandments. Evolution has given rise to believe certain human characteristics such as race, religion, capability, determine human worth, not God-given, and not, as we're told in our Declaration of Independence, to be self-evident. And evolution has led to people who believe human life having no special importance. And this is a sign. Now I'm going to go over to environmentalism. Environmentalism is something that we all believe in. We're told in the garden, that was Adam's job, to tend the garden. So we're not supposed to destroy our environment. We're supposed to tend it. But we're not supposed to kill people to save the planet. And so this is a gentleman by the name of Patrick Moore. If you can play number 2. He was a co-founder of Greenpeace. You may have heard of Greenpeace. It's an environmental organization.
In 1971, I helped found an environmental group in the basement of a Unitarian church in Vancouver, Canada. 15 years later, it had grown into an international powerhouse. We were making headlines every month. I was famous, and then I walked out the door. The mission, once noble, had become corrupted. Political agendas and fear-mongering trumped science and truth. Here's how it happened. When I was studying for my PhD in ecology at the University of British Columbia, I joined a small activist group called the Don't Make a Wave Committee. It was the height of the Cold War. The Vietnam War was raging. I became radicalized by these realities and by the emerging consciousness of the environment. The mission of the Don't Make a Wave Committee was to launch an ocean-going campaign against U.S. hydrogen bomb testing in Alaska, a symbol of our opposition to nuclear war. As one of our early meetings was breaking up, someone said, "Peace." A reply came, "Why don't we make it a green peace?" And a new movement was born. Green was for the environment, and peace was for the people. We named our boat the Greenpeace, and I joined the 12-person crew for a voyage of protest. We didn't stop that H-bomb test, but it was the last hydrogen bomb the United States ever detonated. We had won a major victory. In 1975, Greenpeace took a sharp turn away from our anti-nuclear efforts and set out to save the whales, sailing the high seas to confront Russian and Japanese whalers. The footage we shot, young protesters positioned between harpoons and fleeing whales, was shown on TV around the world. Public donations poured in. By the early 1980s, we were campaigning against toxic waste, air pollution, trophy hunting, and the live capture of orca whales. But I began to feel uncomfortable with the course my fellow directors were taking. I found myself the only one of 6 international directors with a formal science background. We were now tackling subjects that involved complex issues of toxicology, chemistry, and human health. You don't need a PhD in marine biology to know it's a good thing to save whales from extinction. But when you're analyzing which chemicals to ban, you need to know some science. And the first lesson of ecology is that we are all interconnected. Humans are part of nature, not separate from it. Many other species, disease agents and their carriers, for example, are our enemies, and we have the moral obligation to protect human beings from these enemies. Biodiversity is not always our friend. I had noticed something else. As we grew into an international organization with over 100 million a year coming in, a big change in attitude had occurred. The peace in Greenpeace had faded away. Only the green part seemed to matter now. Humans, to use Greenpeace language, had become the enemies of the earth. Putting an end to industrial growth and banning many useful technologies and chemicals became common themes of the movement. Science and logic no longer held sway. Sensationalism, misinformation, and fear were what we used to promote our campaigns. The final straw came when my fellow directors decided that we had to work to ban the element chlorine worldwide. They named chlorine the devil's element, as if it were evil. But this was absurd. Adding chlorine to drinking water was one of the biggest advances in the history of public health. And anyone with a basic knowledge of chemistry knew that many of our most effective pharmaceuticals had a chlorine component. Not only that, but if this anti-chlorine campaign succeeded, it wouldn't be our wealthy donors who would suffer. Wealthy individuals and countries always find a way around these follies. The ones who suffer are those in developing countries, people we're presumably trying to help. For example, Greenpeace has opposed the adoption of golden rice, a genetically modified variety of rice that contains beta-carotene. Golden rice has the potential to prevent the death of 2 million of the world's poorest children every year. But that doesn't matter to the Greenpeace crowd. GMOs are bad, so golden rice must be bad. Apparently millions of children dying isn't. This kind of rigid, backward thinking is usually attributed to the unenlightened and the anti-scientific. But I've discovered from the inside out that it can infect any organization, even those with names as noble-sounding as Greenpeace. I'm Patrick Moore for Prager University.
Okay, how many had seen that before? Have you seen that video before? Okay. So now we've got green everywhere. We have Ocasio-Cortez saying Green New Deal, and all the senators and all the representatives behind her cheering and saying how wonderful this is. And even the children. Look at these children. You want to see brainwashed children? Take a look at that photo. All carrying signs, or all in a capitol or some state building. So I have another video I want to show you. This is a gentleman named Alex Epstein, and he's going to talk about the Green New Deal.
We face an existential threat. Life as we know it is on the line. We have 12 short years to change everything, or it's game over. This is the terrifying scenario that's used by many leading politicians to justify a Green New Deal, an unprecedented increase in government power focused on the energy industry. The core idea of a Green New Deal is that government should rapidly prohibit the use of fossil fuel energy and impose 100% renewable energy, mostly solar and wind. This may sound appealing, but consider what it would entail. Today, 80% of the energy Americans use to heat their homes, farm their land, run their factories, and drive their cars comes from fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Only 3.4% comes from solar and wind, despite decades of government subsidies and mandates to encourage their use. The reason we don't use much sunlight and wind as energy is that they are unreliable fuels that only work when the sun shines and the wind blows. That's why no town, city, or country has ever come close to 100% or even 50% solar and wind. And yet, Green New Deal proponents say they can do the impossible, if only we give the government control of the energy industry and control of major users of energy, such as the transportation industry, manufacturing, and agriculture. All of this is justified by the need to do something about the existential threat of rising CO2 levels. We're told on a daily basis that prestigious organizations like the United Nations have predicted mass destruction and death if we don't get off fossil fuels. What we're not told is that such predictions have a decades-long track record of getting it wrong. And by wrong, I mean completely missing the dartboard wrong. For example, in 1989, the Associated Press reported a United Nations prediction that entire nations could be wiped off the face of the Earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. We're now 2 decades past 2000. We're not missing any nations, and human beings are living longer, healthier, and wealthier lives than ever before. But aren't things bound to get worse? Haven't scientists established that CO2 is a greenhouse gas with a warming influence on the planet? Yes, but that's only a small part of the big picture. Although CO2 causes some warming, it's much less significant than we've been told. Since we started using significant amounts of fossil fuels in the middle of the 19th century, we've increased the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere from 0.03% to 0.04%, which correlates with an average temperature increase of about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. It also correlates with significant global greening, because CO2 is plant food. All of this is far from unprecedented territory for our planet, which has existed with at least 10 times today's CO2 levels and a 25-degree warmer average temperature. What is truly unprecedented, though, is how safe we are from climate. The International Disaster Database, a nonpartisan organization that tracks deaths from climate-related causes, such as extreme heat, floods, storms, and drought, shows that such deaths have been plummeting as CO2 emissions have been rising. How is this possible? Because of the fossil fuel energy that emitted the CO2, which has empowered us to climate-proof our environment with heating, air conditioning, sturdy buildings, mass irrigation, and weather warning systems. Fossil fuel energy has not taken a naturally safe climate and made it unnaturally dangerous. It's taken our naturally dangerous climate and made it unnaturally safe. Fossil fuels are not an existential threat. They're an existential resource because they increase something much more important than the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, the level of human empowerment. Increased life expectancy, income, health, leisure time, and education are all tightly linked to increased access to fossil fuels. Does this mean that we shouldn't look for lower carbon energy alternatives? Of course not. But the alternatives should lead us toward more abundant, more reliable power, not less. The most promising form of alternative energy is not unreliable solar and wind, but reliable carbon-free nuclear energy. Sweden gets 40% of its electricity from nuclear, France over 70%. While nuclear energy is smeared as unsafe, it has actually been demonstrated by study after study to be the safest form of energy ever created. And yet, Green New Deal proponents who say that we have 12 years to save the planet from rising CO2 levels vigorously oppose nuclear, in addition to all fossil fuel use. By opposing every affordable, abundant, reliable form of energy, the Green New Deal won't protect us from an existential threat. It is an existential threat. I'm Alex Epstein, author of The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels for Prager University.
So now let me finish up with a book that I was talking to someone this morning about, Silent Spring. How many people have either read or heard about Silent Spring? This is a book that was written in the 60s by an environmentalist named Rachel Carson. It is very interesting that 2 years ago, in the Canal Valley Unified School District has a summer reading program. And so over the summer, when you're at home, not going to school, you're supposed to read a couple of books. This was one of the books that was assigned to the entire Canal Valley Unified School District. And she spurred the reversal of the use of a pesticide called DDT. Probably all heard of that. That was used in farming, and it was used in even urban settings for the control of those insects. If you remember those insects that Patrick Moore was talking about, the malaria-carrying mosquito and the disease-carrying bugs and beetles. You know, LA is now having an outbreak of bubonic plague because of sanitation conditions in some areas. So she was devoted in trying to stamp out DDT worldwide, and she succeeded. She basically got the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency, headed by William Ruckelshaus, a Republican, to ban DDT. So this is an article in 2007 from that right-wing newspaper called the New York Times, the famous right-wing newspaper. And it said, Rachel Carson's and Myers are celebrating her centennial of her birthday. New generations are reading the book in school. That happened right here. Carson used dubious statistics and anecdotes to warn of cancer epidemics that never came to pass. She rightly noted threats to some birds like eagles and other raptors, but she wildly imagined biocides. She warned that the common American bird, the robin, was on the verge of extinction. Especially odd claims given the large number of robins recorded in Audubon counts before her book. So she was cherry picking the data, using anecdotal stories. Oh, I used DDT and 2 months later I got leukemia or whatever, trying to tie everything together, cause and effect. Okay, and they had actually a committee of the National Academy of Sciences study the impact of pesticides on wildlife. In his review, he praised Carson for literary skills, but wrote, "Mankind has been endangered in the process of upsetting the balance of nature since we withdrew these chemicals from civilization." He said Silent Spring was not a scientific balance of cost and benefits, but a prosecuting attorney's impassioned plea for action. So, and Rachel Carson called DDT elixir of death and no safe dose. And this is an example of the country of Sri Lanka, Ceylon. It used to be called Ceylon. 2.8 million deaths in 1940s to less than 20. 2.8 million to 20. When that's according to the World Health Organization, DDT in 1963. So it went from 2.8 million to 20 deaths. And then in 1964 through 69, the number of cases grew back to 2.5 million when DDT spraying was stopped. And in country after country that had banned it, and the U.S. has such power that if they spray the DDT, then you'll say, oh, it's like it's contaminated, so you can't sell if you're a poor country like Uganda or some other country that wants to sell their fruits and vegetables to Europe. They won't allow the importation if they detect any DDT. So they can't spray DDT to kill the bugs that are on their crops, and they can't spray it in their huts because it might contaminate the fields. So it's been an economic disaster as well as a human disaster. And I'll just show you. This is a plot of different. This is based on the mortality rate of the whole world, and you see when you add back the ban on DDT, that black triangle, and every year this is annual deaths in millions. Each one of those years, from 65, 66, 67, 80, 81, 82, 90, 91, 92, 2000. You can see the deaths just each million. These are measured in fractions of millions times every year. How many people died needlessly because of that ban? So let me just play a short. We may cut this short because of time. Just play a couple of minutes of it. This is John Stossel. You probably recognize him from TV.
Don't you hate mosquitoes? I do. Ooh, when I hear that sound, my skin crawls. So when I was a kid, I was thrilled when the government sent those trucks that sprayed, well, whatever it was they sprayed, it was going to get rid of the bugs. Sometimes we were so excited we ran toward the cloud of white smoke. We were so eager to be mosquito-free. Now, of course, we know that what they were spraying was the evil DDT. Look how much of it they sprayed. Much more, it turns out, than was needed to kill mosquitoes. And yet, none of us worried. We breathed in tons of the stuff. It ended up in our food and water. And what happened? Practically nothing happened. Despite what you've heard, there's been no increase in cancers. Nobody died. No evidence that people got sick from all that extra DDT. Today, the prevailing myth is that DDT is a horrible chemical that should be banned. We think that because of a best-selling book that said DDT would soon kill all America's birds, not to mention give us all kinds of cancer. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, won lots of awards. It's still used today as a text in environmental studies classes. Al Gore's been called the Rachel Carson of global warming. It's a good comparison because it turns out that Silent Spring is filled with nonsense, too. In her book, she suggests DDT gave one woman leukemia, but the woman was diagnosed with leukemia just 2 months after using DDT. Real scientists laugh at the book, but real scientists don't write bestsellers that influence people. Silent Spring made the DDT myth so powerful that DDT is now banned in much of the world. This doesn't hurt us in America because we already used it to eradicate malaria. Malaria used to kill 5,000 Americans per year. Now it's the ban on DDT that kills people. Richard Trenn just wrote a book about that titled The Excellent Powder. Excellent Powder?
Excellent powder indeed. The title comes from a speech that Winston Churchill made in 1944 when he was talking about how the Allies were using the excellent DDT powder to rid the Pacific and European theaters of war of disease like typhus and like malaria.
But wasn't it giving people breast cancer and hormone disruption?
Absolutely not. There have been so many studies over the years that try and find an association between DDT and some human health harm. All of these studies are weak, statistically insignificant, and they don't comply with the most basic epidemiologic criteria that we need to prove cause and effect. We're mixing up association with cause of harm. So no, I mean there is no evidence that this is harmful to humans.
And today, if you take a fraction of what we sprayed in America and what I breathed in, and you put it on the side of a hut in Africa, that protects them from malaria.
Yeah, what happens is that tiny amounts of DDT is sprayed on the inside walls of a house, and it lasts there for about a year. And what it does is it just keeps the mosquitoes outside the house. It works as a great spatial repellent. And
keeps them outside for how long? 6 months?
For over 6 months, up to a year. It's a great way of protecting people from mosquito bites.
And yet some of these African countries say, no, we don't want this stuff.
Well,
we know it's evil, you're poisoning us.
Well, not true. Many African countries have been trying to use DDT. Some do, and luckily now the US government is supporting some of those. Through the President's Malaria Initiative, they're actually supporting some of them. They changed policies from when you last looked at this some years ago. But one country in particular, Uganda, tried to use DDT, but they were so frightened that even the tiniest residues of DDT that may come onto some produce would lead to trade barriers and reject their produce from Europe, that they had to stop their program. It's so absurd. They were worried about DDT residues on tobacco. DDT that we know does not cause cancer on a product that does cause cancer. We should be worried about tobacco residues on the DDT.
And I should point out, this is not just between Rachel Carson and you. The World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control support indoor spraying.
Right, as does the U.S. Agency for International Development. They do so because it works and because we have an emergency in malaria, and we need to use the best tools that we can.
Now, I should say we asked the scaremongers who keep telling these DDT stories to come on this program to debate him, and they would not. Groups like Pesticide Action Network, Greenpeace, the NRDC, the group of lawyers, World Wildlife Fund. I mean, I think these people are murderers. If 1 million people die of malaria a year, these so-called environmentalists kill people.
Well, I mean, murder's a strong word. But what we do know is happening is that there's enormous pressure on governments and even on the WHO to stop the use of this chemical, and instead to promote some of these bizarre so-called environmentally friendly solutions, like planting trees around houses that may or may not repel mosquitoes, maybe using fish that may or may not eat mosquito larvae. These are some of the most naive...
And they pay for drugs to treat malaria once people get it.
That's fine, and we should be doing that, but that doesn't mean... there's no evidence that treating alone is a legitimate way of controlling malaria. We need both. We need prevention and treatment. But to try and foist these so-called environmentally friendly solutions is ridiculous. These are the most half-baked ideas. And in fact, it's insulting to public health professionals that need effective chemical solutions. This is an insect-borne disease, and we need good insecticides. And they campaign against all insecticide use.
World Malaria Day comes 3 days after Earth Day.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a Malaria Day if it weren't for Earth Day.
Right, you know, the anti-insecticide bias, the fear-mongering about DDT, and now that is about other insecticides as well, means that malaria-control programs are left with fewer tools in their arsenal to fight this disease. And it didn't just lead to the rise in malaria cases 20, 30, 40 years ago. It means that in the future now we have fewer insecticides and almost no investment in new tools. DDT is a great insecticide, but we need new chemicals. And there's just been no investment whatsoever in the search for these new tools.
So it's unintended consequences. I'm sure Rachel Carson didn't intend to have all of the people die, especially in the poor third world countries, and especially children are very prone to being bit by mosquitoes. And this is our own California version. Here we've diverted the water that flows down the San Joaquin from the Sacramento River and dump it into the ocean. Because we're saving that little fish on the bottom, that little 3 or 4 inch fish that called. It's not native, by the way. It's not native either. Yeah. Is there a drought? The little known fact is no. We have plenty of water. We're just sending out in the ocean, and we're trying to protect a 3 inch fish that nobody knows about. And so here's the conclusion from this section. You know, belief in evolution is prioritizing saving the earth over saving humanity. You see that in the Green New Deal. Evolution has given rise to radical environmentalism, where humans are considered parasitic organisms, as Patrick Moore told us. The earth should shed us like a flea, and belief in evolution has led government decisions that harm humanity, especially with regard to DDT and the Delta smelt. So I thank you. I give you, in closing, this is the website of Mark Schwartz. It's a great website. The little box up at the top that I highlighted is biblical creation. So we have the saying, truth is never tolerant of a lie. And I just think that you have been exposed today in this presentation to my belief is what's the truth. As a scientist and as a Christian, I believe that this is what the truth is. And hopefully you can use this in your interactions with other people to help bring them to the salvation and knowing Jesus Christ as their Savior. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and God bless you.